I'm going to go ahead and hit broadcast here, and we are recording now, and we'll start promptly at 9:30. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, it is 9:30 Eastern. Good morning, everyone joining in with our session today. My name is Mark Jones. I'm hailing from a place called Atlanta. Very warm week here in Atlanta this week, this is session 6 of 6 this week that we are doing. We're very delighted to have a couple of our partners here with us today. Mr. Bob McGinn from C-Car is joining us from Chicago, and Mr. Charlie Ayers is joining us also from, I think, hailing from the same general area, Charlie, in the Illinois area, from Coordinating Committee on Automotive Repair. So today we're going to be going through a number of things, introducing you to a fantastic range of safety for your shop in automotive technology. Bob is also going to be introducing a range of new COVID-19 content as well. And so I'd like to take about 5 minutes here just to introduce you to how this all works. And first, just a couple of housekeeping things. We have 2 platforms running, obviously the Zoom platform, where we're going to be sharing our screen today, mostly with Bob. But I also want to chat with you a little bit about the notes. I'll be monitoring the chat and notes there in the GTR platform. We also have 5 poll questions that we've put out last night for you folks to respond to, if you don't mind. We'd love to hear your feedback on the polls. And then, of course, over on the files section, we have some files that include Bob's handout, as well as a couple of flyers on C-Car. So we have a couple of things for you all to look at today. I'd like to start by kicking off the session on what exactly is C-Car and how does it work in what is known as the Electude ecosystem. So Electude is a Dutch company that I've been working with for about 10 years now. They do a fantastic job on automotive technology, electric drive, and now all new heavy vehicle. And about a year ago, the team at Electude sat down and said, we are tired of being the sort of the salad or the side plate. We want to be the main course. So what they started to do, is develop a series of fantastic partner products, including C-Car. You may have been in a session yesterday with Michaela Alper, some of you, and seen Career Team and their product known as Career Edge for soft skills. We have MotoLogic, vehicle repair and diagnostics, as well as Haynes joining us as part of the partner products. So I'd like to make a short introduction here with a video that's about a minute long and show you a little bit about Electude and then how it works with the C-Car system. And then we'll hand the ball over to Bob and get started. So here we go, folks. And hopefully everyone can hear this.
The pandemic has shut down the world. It distanced students and teachers. It emptied our shops. Nothing will be the same. Now, as we slowly get back to work, everything has changed. Students track while staying safe from the virus. Instructors need to prepare for a world where students may be on campus only part-time. They need a comprehensive and flexible solution for whatever comes their way. With Electude, learning happens in any setting, whether students are in school or at home. Electude's theoretical and practical e-learning solutions empower instructors to get the maximum potential out of their students. As you prepare for this new educational reality, make Electude your plan A and your plan B. Lecture, assign lessons, and capture test results real-time, safely from home. Electude has the webinars, tutorials, and direct support you need to get up and teach you fast and easy. Join the thousands of schools that use Electude for their online and in-class instruction. Get started at electude.com and let the potential fly.
All right, so that's a brief introduction. I'd like to quickly show you now the product listings. So in light vehicle solutions, the crown jewel at Electude, their meat and potatoes, if you will, is Automotive Essentials. That's the product that most of your automotive instructors are using across the state. We have many great customers in Tennessee. Electric Drive is also offered. That is what Bob is going to be discussing today, is safety in battery electric vehicles as well as hybrid electric vehicles. Very, very dangerous vehicles if they come in damaged. So we're going to be talking a lot about that this morning. Engine management simulator, probably one of the most sophisticated simulators on the market. Darcy Weddell did a fantastic job in a session yesterday on that. And then let's take a look quickly at the partner products to bring this home now. So we have right up first and foremost CCAR. So Coordinating Committee on Automotive Repair. Bob and Charlie are going to share more with you about that in just a minute. MotoLogic Vehicle Repair and Diagnostics. Haynes All Access Manuals. A hardware connection with ConsolLab training aids. So now we can put the cloud-based e-learning for your students anywhere, anytime with any device, and then send them home with a trainer if you wish as well. And then down towards the bottom, Michaela at Career Team yesterday with Career Edge, Soft Skills, and Employability. Where does that all run? It runs right inside your website. So yesterday, for example, at Antioch High School, we had a gentleman by the name of Jason Anderson who teaches engineering and drafting. We don't necessarily do those areas, but he loved what he saw in Career Team and Career Edge. So we would set him up with his own website where he could go in as teacher and then navigate over to the courses tab where he would see a range of Career Edge soft skills or CCAR, e-safety. So CCAR runs right inside your website. We would drill into the course content with 60 lessons inside. And by the way, that was 136 hours of content, guys. You don't have to deliver it all, but know that you've got everything you need inside this package to deliver some amazing content from PPE to lift safety to tool and fire, lockout, tagout, bloodborne pathogens. All of those things are in there, as well as COVID-19 content, okay? So that's where it all runs. Last but not least, CCAR's website is listed right there. And we'll have more about that in just a minute, but some fantastic partners, both Fiat Chrysler as well as Honda, and some amazing others as well. So with that all said, I'm gonna hand the ball over to Mr. Bob McGinn. And Bob, you have the ball. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
I will just unshare my screen. There we go. Sorry about that.
Okay, give me 1 second. You should now see my presentation screen.
Yep.
Very good.
Yep.
Okay, everybody strap in, get a cup of coffee because we're off to the races. Good morning. My name is Bob. I'm with CCAR, and you're here for hybrid electric and battery electric vehicle safe handling and best practices. If not, now is your chance to jump. Presented by Electude and the Coordinating Committee for Automotive Repair, or as I prefer to call it, simply CCAR. Before we go any further, we must review our disclaimer, which I can liquefy down to and distill that simply we are not legal or medical experts. Anything that comes out of my mouth should not be taken as legal standard or medical standard. Please consult the experts and any administration in your jurisdiction. So a little background. CCAR's been around since 1994. Startup funds came from the United States Environmental Protection Agency. CCAR became self-sufficient in the early 2000s, and since we have signed multiple alliance agreements with US OSHA. We are now an OSHA alliance partner and soon to be an OSHA ambassador. We have been elevated by OSHA. They tend to like us. In 2005, we were chosen by NAHAC to develop a line of hazmat training for automotive dealerships. Anybody that has any connections with FCA or General Motors stores, their parts departments are probably using our products to train their people for hazmat regulation.
Hey, Bob, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm not seeing your screen changing. I'm still seeing the hybrid electric and battery electric vehicle safe handling screen up.
Oh, geez.
That's right, Bob. Charlie is correct.
But he should have pulled the reins back.
I know your presentation, you probably have flipped through a couple of pages and we're not seeing that. We're only seeing your opening page. There you go.
There you go.
No real content that you missed. So
okay.
Apologize.
Sorry to interrupt.
All right. It said that it was doing it, but now it's moving, correct?
Yeah, you're good. All right. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you.
So back to where I left off. Yes, as Mark had told you, we partner with Electude to provide e-safety. We are based in Chicago, and the sole focus of CCAR is automotive safety and hazmat. Our partner Electude, founded in 1990 by two auto instructors who pioneered, as Mark told you, a genius approach. They're the world's leading auto e-learning solution, cloud-based. It allows instructors a broad spectrum of unmatched learning solutions, and they are a partner to provide e-safety. By the numbers, which I'm going to blow right past because those numbers, because of COVID, have all jumped significantly. There are more users of Electude than there have ever been in its history. Which brings you to me. I am officially older than dirt. Some of that dirt may be heavy. I still have current ASEs. I am a recovering wrench. Started my recovery in July of 17 and joined CCAR in August of 17. As a short disclaimer for me personally, if something in this presentation turns out you don't like it, complain to me afterwards and we'll see how this turns out. So the basis of this course is safety concepts for the compromised. This course does not address normal handling or diagnostics. This course will not deal with any manufacturer or tier 1 supplier issues. We will limit the discussion to PPE, personal protective equipment, isolation, and firefighting. So, whether or not you currently have or are teaching hybrid in your course offering right now, likely you will have a hybrid or battery electric brought into your shop at some point in the future. Might be a daily driver of a coworker on faculty, might be a new acquisition by an enthusiastic up-and-coming gearhead is what we used to refer to them. Maybe you have collision techs enrolled in your program. Where are you getting your wrecks to repair if you have a collision program? If you're a gearhead yourself, your collision program has found cars in the same shape as my first car, you have a rusted out wreck ready for the scrapyard. And if that rusted out wreck is a hybrid or electric vehicle, you have a potential hazard and a potential problem. Now, hybrids and EVs have been around for a while. To date, there are probably more than 4 million of them traveling the roadways worldwide. HEVs and EVs offer substantial increases in fuel economy and the potential to greatly reduce greenhouse gas emissions as the source emitter. Where they get the power is a discussion too long for this presentation. To achieve these goals, hybrids and electrics use different and complex components and strategies compared to those used in traditional ICE powertrains. But central to all is some type of high voltage storage battery composed of either lithium ion or nickel metal hydride. The unique operating characteristics of hybrids and electrics present a unique set of hazards that need to be understood by your technicians and your students before contact for diagnosis or repair begins. In the course of a normal day-to-day, hybrids and electrics pose no greater risk than traditional ICE powertrains. However, when extraordinary events such as collision, fire, flooding, or containment penetration of the high voltage battery occurs, it may start in motion a series of events that can be extremely dangerous. Now, I may use the term extraordinary event. I am referring to things that are necessarily not a collision. Could be something as simple as grounding the chassis, which in theory is a collision, but you're not hitting another vehicle. You might have hit a pothole. Or it could be as simple as the battery cooling system is beginning to fail at a mechanical level and the electronic portion of the monitoring system for cooling has not caught up with it. When an event such as a collision or other extraordinary event occurs, the vehicle's protection strategy typically executes automatically to prevent possible electric shock and fire hazard exposure to the occupants. We know what these strategies are because they're very similar to ICE. We would open back traction battery contacts. We would disable the fuel system. When this occurs, a condition known as stranded energy becomes present in the high voltage battery. Stranded energy is defined as the inability to remove stored energy from the battery pack after a collision or some other event isolates it. The dangers: there are two hazards to anyone in contact with the vehicle after an extraordinary event. And this means first responders on the scene and later on vehicle technicians or students. The first is electric shock hazard from either battery chemistry. The second is fire. Electric shock hazards may be present after an extraordinary event, which occurs resulting in a breach or damage to the battery's high voltage protective case, such as a crack or a puncture. Technicians and students should always approach any hybrid or electric that has been involved in a collision or other extraordinary event with the mindset that the high voltage battery poses an imminent danger of electric shock and is unstable until a detailed inspection of the components indicates otherwise. Both lithium and nickel metal hydride are capable of producing extraordinarily high voltage. Contact with any object protruding from a damaged high voltage battery must be avoided. Can't stress this enough. When the battery type involved is lithium ion, we really have a party in progression. Particular attention should also be paid to the following possible conditions: popping or other noises from the battery area, leaking or dripping fluids from the battery, smoke or hissing from the battery, sparks in the battery area, because they all mean something. If a vehicle involved in an extraordinary event is found to have damage to the lithium battery case and is not had and experienced a thermal event yet, and by thermal event, I mean fire, then precautions including isolating the vehicle outside 50 feet away from any other flammable, combustible material should be put into effect. The battery should be monitored with thermal imaging or non-contact infrared thermometer for a sufficient period of time to determine if the battery is getting hotter or cooler over time. Once it has been determined that the battery temperature is trending towards cooler or at stable ambient, then it's possible to address further repair operations. Getting warmer above ambient is not a good thing. If we were to bring a vehicle into our shop or into our collision program that was new to our stable of vehicles, I would first leave it parked outside overnight, and the first thing I would do the following day is check that battery. If it's 80 degrees outside at the time that you were checking the battery with your non-contact or infrared device, and that battery is at 70 degrees or 60 degrees or even 80 degrees, you're good. If that battery is at 112 to 120 degrees, something's going on. We must strongly recommend also that the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer's documented repair procedures for handling damaged or compromised high voltage batteries be followed if available. If necessary, contact the OEM directly for technical assistance. If you're attempting to remove the damaged battery from the vehicle, the process should be monitored continuously for changes in the battery's thermal state, with the expectation that an unstable lithium-ion battery could develop a thermal event at any time. And if you're successful in removing a damaged battery, please store that battery outside the building, preferably in a shed or under a tent to keep it out of the weather. But we are primarily concerned about keeping it away from the public and any prying eyes and anybody that could wander into that area inadvertently, not knowing that there was a hazard present. So while the bluster about lithium ion and fire, why the isolation, why the temperature monitoring, why is this guy busting my chops this early in the morning? It's because of thermal runaway. Thermal runaway describes a process which is accelerated by increased temperature, in turn releasing energy that further increases temperature. Yeah, have a sip of coffee. I'm going to repeat that because what did that guy just tell me? And I'll repeat it, that thermal runaway describes a process which is accelerated as the temperature increases, in turn releasing more energy and more heat that further increases that temperature, a thermal chain reaction. Thermal runaway event can take place as a result of any of the following conditions: physical damage such as crushing, tearing, puncturing, water intrusion into the battery if the battery or the vehicle wound up in the lake, the pool, or the swamp, or ignition of the battery from a fire by gasoline. Could be not the battery's fault initially, and then reignite after the fact once the battery has been heated sufficiently to get it to thermal runaway. So if you experience popping, leaking, dripping, smoking, hissing, or sparks in the battery area, you may be a thermal runaway. And because it's a gift that keeps on giving, there is no time limit. A thermal runaway event could take weeks to occur after a collision or other extraordinary event. A thermal runaway event with reignition may occur at any time without warning. Therefore, please park your lithium-ion, hybrid, or electric with potential for thermal runaway outside, isolated 50 feet from any other flammable or combustible. A quick word now about firefighting. For those of you that have fire sciences in your programs, this might be interesting. Thermal runaway resulting in fire or reignition is not easily extinguished. Firefighting operations may require in excess of 2,500 gallons of water to sufficiently cool and extinguish a high-capacity lithium-ion battery. The use of firefighting agents, your class A, B, C, D foam or halon, simply do not possess the cooling ability, the heat sink ability of water. Reignition that develops into a fully involved battery fire will most likely require calling the fire department to handle the fire. So you need to be prepared to evacuate if necessary. Do not attempt to extinguish it with the garden hose. You're probably not going to be able to do that. However, those of you that have fire science and have a established fire brigade in training, let them have at it if it's safe for them to do so. Also, we must consider that hybrids will have the additional gift of gasoline. For this reason, careful consideration must be given to the reduction or isolation of the vehicle's liquid fuel charge if possible to prevent catastrophic loss of life or property damage. Because of this, it may not be possible to conduct repairs on a damaged hybrid safely. You can't get the gasoline away from the heat source. You may just well push it outside and get out the marshmallows. This would be a good place to see if we have any questions so far. And I apologize for running rapid fire, but there is a lot of content to cover.
Bob, I don't see anything presently here that needs immediate attention.
Okay. That's the case. Very good. And so moving on. So systems are designed to generally be tolerant of abusive conditions such as overcharge, short circuit, crush, fire exposure, or over discharge, and mechanical shock or vibration. Propagation of a thermal runaway from cell to cell can lead to a cascading failure of the battery module that results in a fire that can be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to extinguish. And this is regardless of whether or not that is a prismatic cell or a string of 18 650s or 21 700s, which are the newer batteries. And if my camera is still visible, this is what I'm talking about right here. This is a live cobalt-based 18650. Most of the early Tesla PD100s had 7,000 of these. If we were in person, I'd be passing these out for everybody to have a look at. So it's important to remember that batteries contain both an oxidizer in the form of the cathode and fuel in the form of an anode in a sealed container. So moving forward, let's identify some of the chemistries out there in the powertrains. All of the players listed here are cathodes except for lithium titanate, which is an anode. The anode used with your nickel, manganese, cobalt, nickel, cobalt, aluminum, the LMO or the LCO is meso carbon microbeads, which you all know as graphite. And there you see some of the vehicles associated with nickel manganese cobalt is in the Volt, the BMW i3. Tesla Model 3 and the Model Y are now using nickel cobalt aluminum. LTO and LMO used respectively, LMO mostly for blending. And the LCO, the lithium, excuse me, where'd I have it? Oh yeah, lithium cobalt oxide. That is the original OG of the lithium ion battery family and the least stable. Tesla Roadster and the Smart 4 II use those batteries. So under normal circumstances, the fuel and the oxidizer convert electric energy or convert energy electrochemically, chemical to electric energy conversion. If the electric materials are allowed to react chemically in an electrochemical cell, the fuel and oxidizer convert the chemical energy directly into heat and gas. And because we have a fuel and an oxidizer in a sealed container, we don't need any oxygen. Once started, this chemical reaction will likely proceed to its completion, meaning it will burn completely through as it becomes exothermic. Once a thermal runaway event has begun, the ability to stop it quickly is extremely difficult. So just to include a little confusion, a little science. And don't worry, there's no quiz. But on the high end of the scale, lithium-ion batteries have a specific energy in the range of, pick the units that you would choose to use, whether that's ISO. In my case, I prefer 185 to 200 watt hours per kilo. This is the energy that they support, how much juice they can hold, sometimes referred to as energy density, but that's volumetric. Now, depending upon the type of cell, the chemistry, the electrolyte makeup, but most importantly, the state of charge, the enthalpy of combustion, or we'll simply say heat of combustion, can range from 1,388 to 5,500 watt hours per kilo. This is its capacity to release heat in an exothermal event, or how big of a bonfire they can become. So if you grasp nothing else from the man with his hair on fire being me, it's this from this presentation, that all chemistries of lithium have the potential to release much larger quantities of heat energy compared to the electrical energy that they can store if that battery is on fire. The higher the state of charge, the higher the heat release rate. And in some tests, the 18650 heat release range is in the area of 5.2 to 8.3 kilojoules, which is significant for one little battery. The higher the state of charge, the sooner thermal runaway and exothermic release will occur. I threw in a new term, heat release rate, just so everyone's clear. We use the birthday candle example, that one candle will burn at approximately 1600 degrees F and has a heat release rate of about 60 watts a second. And who knew that joules and watts were the same? 10 candles will still burn at about 1600 degrees, but now the heat release rate is 600 watts a second. Excuse me. The failure modes of a lithium-ion cell that can lead to a thermal runaway event can be categorized into three major groups: thermal instabilities, electrical, and mechanical. Thermals would be, they have contact with a fire event. They're stored at too high of a temperature. There's a cooling issue within the battery. Electrical instability, and these are all things that could be caused by a collision or by some other failure mode that allows the temperature inside the battery to elevate. For electrical, overcharge, overvoltage, a voltage reversal or polarity reversal, something happening inside. And mechanical instability would only come along if there was contact with the vehicle or with the battery, causing penetration or immersion in water. And the magic number in research appears to be around 170 to 200 degrees Celsius to trigger a thermal runaway event. And this temperature is going to pop up later, and that's based on lithium cobalt. So understand thermal runaway event, it is essential to grasp this concept also, that heat generation increases exponentially more rapidly with temperature, while heat dissipation only progresses, or excuse me, I say increase here, it should be decrease. But as we see it plot, you'll understand why they say increases more gradually over time. The response to any failure mode scenario arises from the dynamics of heat generation and heat dissipation over time. So when a battery pack module fails, the resulting outcomes fall into one of three categories: preferred, acceptable, or unacceptable. So let's have a quick look at each of the fault scenarios that lead and what outcome they lead to. First up is a preferred outcome, a graceful failure. And if you're looking at the plot that's on the screen now, you'll notice that the heating rate and the cooling rate, as plotted, there's no numbers on it, they just trend at approximately the same rate. The scenario here would be along the lines of a failure occurs within the cell that leads to an increase in temperature. Excuse me, whatever that may be. Reaction within the cell creates additional heat and gas. The reaction zone expands. Heat dissipation rate and the heat generation rate are approximately the same over time, and the cell is cooled. It's a benign temporary thermal event. There's no thermal runaway. It will look something like this. Think of the colors as a thermal scan. Really not much to look at. We scorched one cell. You may not even set a warning light in the dash. An event that leads to graceful failure at the cell level, when it occurs, increase in temperature, reaction occurs within the cell, and the heat dissipation rate exceeds the generation rate over time, or is approximately the same and the cell is cooled. Next up is an acceptable outcome. And here, the plot has changed. On the screen, we have a heating rate that exceeds the cooling rate. Cooling is lagging behind. And here we have, again, a failure, whatever that is, that occurs within the cell. The reaction within the cell creates additional heat and gas. We'll expand the reaction zone. Heat dissipation rate is less than the generation rate, and the cell enters thermal runaway. We produce additional heat and gas, and the cell vents and explodes. Excuse me, but in this particular instance, does not drive additional nearby cells to thermal runaway. Excuse me, again, my poor attempt at a thermal scan. Once again, not much to look at, except in this case, we let the smoke out. To recap, an event occurs within the cell that causes an increase in temperature, be it a short circuit, adjacent heating, overcharge, whatever it is that causes the cell to fail. Reaction within the cell creates additional heat and gas. The reaction zone expands. Dissipation rate is less than the heat generation rate, and the cell enters thermal runaway. As additional heat and gas are produced, the cell vents and explodes. But we do not take nearby cells with us, which leaves us with the unacceptable outcome. And if you remember a little earlier, I said that about 170 or so to 190 degrees is the magic number to trip the trigger for a thermal runaway. You see that here in this plot. What you're looking at is the heating rate of the cell in degrees Celsius. As we move across the x-axis, starting from 100, we heat at about 1 degree a minute, maybe a little less, till we get out to about 150 degrees. At 150 degrees, we start to ramp up. We're into acceleration from the onset point. And then in this particular case, at 190 degrees, the thing goes vertical. This is the point of no return. And this is described as an abuse event occurs within the cell that leads to an increase in temperature. Pick your favorite mode of failure. Reaction within the cell creates additional heat and gas, and the reaction zone expands. The heat dissipation rate is substantially less than the heat generation rate over time, and the cell enters thermal runaway. Additional heat and gas are produced. The cell vents violently and explodes. And in this case, the adjacent cells are driven to thermal runaway and also explode. Cascade of cell failures consumes the entire battery. So I wonder how this is going to turn out. Yeah, kind of what I expected. So, everybody okay? Anybody get any on them? No fragments? We're all good? Moving on. To recap, an abuse event occurs within the cell, leads to an increase in temperature. The reaction within the cell creates additional heat and gas, and the reaction zone expands. Heat dissipation is substantially less than heat generation rate over time, and the cell enters thermal runaway. Additional heat and gas are produced. The cell vents violently and explodes, and adjacent cells are driven into thermal runaway and takes the whole battery with it. So with such a rosy outlook, you have to ask yourself, it's as bad as it gets. If the previous information didn't sufficiently complicate your electric vehicle workday, let me please humbly present my personal favorite, submerged vehicles. Submarines present a different set of possibilities and a completely different timeline. Submarines tend to bubble as water has entered the battery, and that water may not deplete all of the energy charge that's in the battery. Submarines can generate electrolysis gases as the battery arcs and shorts. You may want to take steps to prevent those gases from accumulating. If you have a flood victim that shows up at your shop, park that thing outside with the windows down, the hood and the deck lid open to prevent any gas from accumulating. Last thing we want is somebody opening and an arc from some contact causing the gas to blow the windows out of it. Once the water's receded, there can still be a shock and thermal runaway hazard. Simply because the battery has been submerged doesn't mean that the battery has been quenched of its energy. Submarines in storage or under repair still need to be monitored for temperature and isolated when appropriate. And once again, this would be a good place to stop to see if we have any questions so far.
Bob, I don't see any right now. Let's continue.
Very good. So let's talk about PPE. Before you work with high voltage, you need the right high voltage personal protective equipment. And what we in automotive call high voltage, the personal protective equipment manufacturers refer to as low voltage, or in some cases, ultra low voltage. Some of you may already have qualified PPE and you may not know it. You may have already had qualified shoes if they're rated for 2313 or 241311 EH for electrical hazard. When your boots are dry, they would insulate the wearer from 18,000 volts AC 60 hertz for a minute, or a continuous protection of up to 750 volts. Otherwise, your only option would be something along the lines of a crush-proof or a galosha like this, which is not crush-proof, and it's only dielectric rated to 20,000 volts, but when is the likelihood that you'll be working on a 20,000 volt electric or hybrid? Not currently. Now, I only provide this info as a tip when you're shopping for PPE. You need IEC, that is the International Electrotechnical Commission's voltage rated gear for 120 to 1500 volts DC. They consider that low voltage. Contrast that by the fact that automotive considers 60 volts plus volts DC high voltage. This is important because as the voltage rating rises, so does the cost of personal protective equipment. All qualified high voltage PPE will have a voltage range and an expiration date. This applies to gloves, boots, sleeves, aprons, all of the rubber PPE. Most of this is previously all lineman's PPE. It's important to use the correct high voltage rating and to have your personal protective equipment recertified by the manufacturer or replaced once it expires. We do not use expired PPE. Class 0 is your target group for rubber gloves or any other rubber items, and that tag on that item is red. Now, rubber gloves need to be inspected for surface defects. Air testing is a standard test for integrity by either a roll-up test or using a glove pump. No shop air at any time. Gloves can be pinholed by overinflation, and a pinhole is sufficient to convey a lethal shock. Not to mention that gloves are expensive. Our example was $130 US when we purchased them, and they were expired when they arrived. If you're teaching high voltage at full scale, then a glove pump is a must. The task of testing is something you can delegate to a competent student or a subordinate teaching assistant to make sure that the gloves that you're using in shop are in top condition and to be able to remove those gloves that fail. Make sure your students are using the outers. There are outer leathers that are always accompanying your high voltage. They should come as a kit with the rubber inners that are high voltage and the outer leather that protect them. The outers need to be inspected for damage or contamination, especially contamination. And why? Because at 400 to 600 volts, contaminants may be conductive, whereas at 12 volts, no one would notice. In the scenario I always present is if someone was unaccustomed to working with gloves on and decided that they were going to use them for everything. This is a student I'm referring to, certainly not an instructor, but got a little grease and a little metal shavings on the end of the glove. If he made contact and grounded with a 12-volt circuit, it's an oops, possibly a spark, and it would be a giggle. At 600 volts, it might be a trip to the hospital. If I was giving this presentation in person, I'd have samples of PPE to pass out among the group. Unfortunately, the photo examples will have to suffice. Here is an example of the rating label and the expiration on our pair of high voltage. And now would be a good time to discuss PPE that has an arc thermal protection value rating, or ATPV. These devices are essential for thermal isolation, not necessarily electrical isolation. You need the right arc thermal protection value for your process and your application. This chart shows that the arc flash or hazard risk category as it relates to the incident heat or incident of heat energy, along with the minimum ATPV for that personal protective equipment. Must be noted here that resistance to heat is not the same as electrical isolation. In most cases, you're going to be looking at arc flash category 2 would be the standard. You'll see why in a second. Now, I also have a demo face shield, which would have been passed around that nobody gets to see except in this illustration. It is a Cellstrom 31200. The reason I bring it up specifically, it is the only arc flash 2 rated protection we could find that isn't connected to a hard hat. Why? Because most PPE for electric is designed for linemen working out on high voltage wiring. They haven't caught up to the automotive sector yet. Now, as our class 2, this has an arc thermal protection value rating of 9.9 calories per square centimeter. The ATPV rating is protection against incident of heat or arc flash, not necessarily for electrical isolation. And we all remember from our science days as children that the calorie is the energy required to raise 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius at 1 atmosphere. That's great. It doesn't mean anything to me. Or possibly that the onset of second-degree burn may occur at 1.2 calories per square centimeter per second. That's the Stoll curve. Still doesn't mean anything. How about this? And this was conveyed to me by an engineer, a very smart man. you can approximate 1 calorie per square centimeter per second to be equal to holding your finger over the tip of flame of a cigarette lighter for 1 second. Your institution may require Arc Flash 2 rating that meets NFPA 70E, 130-7, yada, yada. Check with your safety professionals, unless that's you. That would be the minimum that I would be recommending for your students. And when we're discussing rated clothing, like this example, the jacket pictured here, it is important to realize that for clothing to be ATPV rated, it will inherently acquire a level of fire resistance, or better return as flame resistance. To maintain this proper flame rating, it is necessary to realize that it will have to be maintained in a certain method. Ignore. At the same time, that it is important to distinguish that while being arc rated makes an article fire resistant, being fire resistant doesn't necessarily make you arc rated. Now, in the back of this jacket, the tag tells the story. But as we move in closer, here the logo says fire rated, but let's have a look at that inner tag. The inner tag lays out the details. Arc thermal protection value, 10 calories a square centimeter. The garment is flame resistant and not flame proof. And I love that they put it, but they have to put it in the tag. But is there anybody out there that seriously thinks that this cotton jacket would be flame proof? Along with the fact that the garment is not explosion proof. But washing it incorrectly may be a problem, because if you wash it, dry it, add any fabric softener or anything that they tell you not to do, according to that label, it will reduce the arc thermal protection value of the garment. So please be careful with how they are laundered if you are using them. As a best practice, don't use anything that's suspect. Inspect your personal protective equipment frequently. And the best rule that I can apply as a best practice is only use your high voltage personal protective equipment for high voltage work. Segregate it. You have face shields, gloves, any other device that you're using for PPE for high voltage, lock it up when we're not teaching or working in high voltage. Now, you're going to need one of these for each vehicle, hybrid or electric, being worked on in the shop or something similar. What it is a lockout tagout box. You can buy one or build one out of a surplus ammo box. And the theory is very simple. You need 2 locks at a minimum. You or your teaching assistant, somebody that administrates or manages, will keep 1 key, and then your students or technicians will keep the other. Inside of the box will go things like the vehicle service plug, specific fuses to keep the vehicle disabled, the ignition keys of the fobs, and anything that you can think of that, you know, you may remove a module small enough to fit in the box that makes the vehicle a brick. The reason is we do not want to reactivate a vehicle that has been worked on by students until everything has been reviewed by a teacher, manager, teaching assistant, and then you as the man on the job have decided, okay, we can reactivate this vehicle, probably most likely in your presence. Now, as far as test equipment goes, the minimum standard is IEC Cat 3 or better at 600 volts as a minimum rating. And please check your test leads, because we are talking again about students who may have damaged the test lead. And we all know, I know I did it when I was in shop class, that if I broke something, I wasn't necessarily going to be the first one to run right up and say, teacher, teacher, look what I did. But again, the difference is that at 12 volts, a short to ground would be an oops, or it's a giggle. At 600 volts, it's calling an ambulance, or it's a small fire. Now, this chart is going to show you maximum transient protection for the working voltage range. Cat 3 600 being the minimum, devices afford you transient voltage protection up to 6,000 volts. You can go to Cat 3 or Cat 4 if you so choose. What I'm trying to convey here, simply being a Cat 2 at 600 volts is not going to provide you the before mentioned 6,000 volt transient, and as you drop in that category of cat down to cat 1, it reduces. It's about the transient that if something happens, you will be protected reasonably against it. So I have to ask a rhetorical question here: who's teaching the one-hand rule or live dead live? Veterans of high voltage work will traditionally use the one-hand rule when working on a high voltage circuit. This means that only one hand at a time can be used to work on a high voltage circuit. The purpose of the rule is to reduce the risk of electrical shock that has the potential to cause cardiac arrest from passing through the student, through the torso. This discipline will add a additional layer of safety to the protection already afforded you by rubber gloves and other personal protective equipment. Now, to adhere to the one-hand rule, when taking a direct voltage reading, it is essential that you have at least one electrical lead that is equipped with a properly rated insulated alligator clip. And using only one hand, pick the hand that you wish, connect that lead with the alligator clip to one circuit's test point, and then taking your same hand, place the other lead in contact with a test point to make a reading. No more than one hand should be holding a lead or touching a vehicle or a ground at any time. Now, live dead live is a alternative method to check that your meters are working as a reference power source. This is particularly helpful when we are checking for power down on a hybrid or electric to make sure that zero is actually zero. To test the meter function before checking the system, zero faults, which we would require in disconnect verification, check the meter on a battery or a reference test voltage, then test the high voltage circuit for 0 volts, then immediately back to your reference. Your live is the battery or your reference, your zero or your dead is the high voltage vehicle to make sure that zero is actually zero, and then back to the reference point to prove the meter function is correct, live dead live. Meters should be tested in the same range and mode for live dead live and voltage absence tests, which means you may want to switch the meter to a static range instead of letting it auto range. If you have something as old as mine, it will drive you crazy waiting for it to keep up. And as we wind down here, just because NHTSA demands 500 ohms per volt system isolation doesn't mean that you don't need an insulation tester. If you were going to be testing insulation, you can't do it with a multimeter. An insulation tester uses a reference voltage anywhere from 500 to 15,000 volts DC. And if you're looking at the illustration of that fluke that's up on the screen, it's showing 150 gigs ohm at 5,249 volts reference. Now, every OEM that builds or sells in North America publishes an emergency response guide. It is a wonder source of particulars that you will not find in typical service information, because this was designed for first responders to let them know what wires to cut, where the 12-volt battery is, where the high voltage battery is located, what areas to pry on, what areas to avoid where orange cabling may be. These are all available on the web. If you have a new vehicle that comes in to your shop, download one, go through it so that you know what you're working with in advance of your students walking in and putting hands on. Here is the thanks list. Some of these people have contributed greatly in the theory of this course. Should be in the handout. So before we get to any questions, let me say that it's not my intention to scare you off of electric drive, unless of course you plan on disregarding all of the hazards that may be present. And at that point, I will open it to questions.
Thank you, Bob. We do have one from Mr. James Carter. Let me go back up the ladder here a little bit. He says that the biggest issue he sees right now for his shop, and he does not have an HEV yet, but they're looking at one right now. He has a friend with a Tesla, and they're going to be changing tires and doing the basic maintenance, but it's a chance for him to start using that vehicle for HEV, I should say BEV safety. But he says the biggest issue that he sees right now in the shop is not only the voltage, but where to properly lift this car. In other words, where are the lift points so as not to damage the battery? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this has been conveyed since basically day one that I walked in the door at C-Car when going to conferences about one of the quirks about Tesla, that you need to get their specific service information as far as lift points. You may find something in their emergency response guide that will tell you, but I to date have not gone out to approach Tesla. And unfortunately, I guess it's something I should do for future reference. But I would write to Tesla if it was me and ask simply, is there something for a specific year and model that you can relate to us? As we are a school and we are teaching students, hopefully someday future Tesla technicians, where are the correct lift points? What can you give us that will be provided to us, hopefully at no cost?
Very good. Jeffrey Clevin has a question here, and that is there a specific certification that we should look at getting before allowing these vehicles into our shop?
A specific certification for the instructors or for the students?
I'm thinking for the instructor.
Okay, well, brings up a sticky wicket, and I was hoping to avoid it. We because we are not running the show here, and we are the guest of CTE, and they are the convening authority, if you will. When Electude presents this course to its instructors as part of a refresher or webinar or whatever it might be that they do periodically, and I am asked to present this course, I present this course with a post-test that gives a certification from C-Car that essentially states that the instructor has sat through the presentation and has taken a post-test and passed at 80% or better and received a certificate from me.
Okay.
But
Okay, awesome.
as far as what's going on the outside, unfortunately, I can't recommend anybody else's because that's a conflict.
Right.
And I don't know. There are other avenues out there if you start looking on the web who would present you with any type of certification. I can't answer.
Okay. Yes, I have confirmed with Jeffrey it is for him as instructor. And folks, what I'll do is put in the chat here a link to Electude's basic training as well as advanced training where we can get you connected with Electude. And I'm sure, Bob, you'll be doing additional sessions down the road for something like this.
Anytime that I'm invited by the people at Electude, when they have a group of techs or students or instructors that want me to run the presentation and provide a certification, I'm happy to do it.
Awesome.
Right now, because of the summer conference season, we kind of left it by the wayside to let the teaching institutions that we're hosting decide what are appropriate credentials.
Very good. So that's it for now. What I would suggest is we take a quick 5-minute break for everyone, if that's okay, and give Bob a little rest here, and then we'll rejoin. Let's call it, since we're coming up on the half hour here, let's call it 10:35. So 10:35 Eastern, we'll pick back up with some new COVID-19 content from C-Car. Whenever you're ready, Bob.
Okay, give me one more minute and I'll be ready to go here.
Yeah, take your time.
Among Bob's many talents is he's a great graphic guy. And don't be fooled to thinking he's at some high-rise office there with Chicago skyline in his background. I happen to know he's literally doing this from his basement. And it just has that screen up there in the background to give you a nice viewpoint of what Chicago looks like on a good day.
It's a beautiful city.
It is.
Absolutely. I was telling
A lot
Bob
of
I lived in Milwaukee for 5 years, 80 to 85. So I was north of you.
We pride ourselves on being an efficient nonprofit. We don't spend money unnecessarily. So that is definitely not where our offices are.
All right.
Okay, if everybody's ready to continue, let's move on. All right, we're going to move now to e-safety essentials, COVID-19 safety and best practices for automotive service operations, managers and staff. I realize it's a mouthful, but if you listen to me in the first presentation, you know I've often been accused that when you ask McGinn what time it is, he'll tell you how to build a watch. So, sometime last year, a virus emerged in the city of Wuhan, and it has to date run rampant across the globe. SARS-CoV-2 is a respiratory illness that has taken a great toll on the elderly and those with underlying health issues like diabetes, heart disease, COPD, or those who may be immunocompromised. The latest indicators and research also suggest that smokers of any age may be at greater risk. So, in an effort to inform students of the hazards and to assist in maintaining cohesion in the auto service industry, we created 2 new modules in C-Car e-safety, each for a different target audience. One for management, that's the landing page, and one targeted for staff members. And this is the one that I recommend for students working in commercial shops as part of their course of study. Because regardless of where you are, and forgive me, whatever your personal political beliefs may be, it won't change who the decision makers will be in this equation. Those decision makers will be business owners and the parents of those students. It is our hope that these modules will be a tool to help educators inform their students new to the commercial repair environment as to what they may be required to cooperate with. In the current environment, things have changed in how business is done. Most states consider auto repair essential services, especially when they are providing services to first responders or maintaining municipal fleets. Many that continue to operate have new rules and protocols in place. So here we have a list of the core competencies that the staff of a commercial automotive operation should be observing. This includes part-time students. So what's on that list? Things like vehicle intake, vehicle preparation, safe handling during service, disinfection, staff safety and health monitoring. That's new. Also, personal protective equipment and social distancing. To briefly review, COVID-19 isn't the same as viruses that cause things like the common cold. It is thought to spread through inhaling respiratory droplets from an infected person when they exhale, cough, or sneeze. The Centers for Disease Control recently updated the list of persons and conditions that are at greatest risk if they contract COVID-19. In addition to those conditions listed here on the screen, you can also add conditions that might increase risk, including high blood pressure, liver disease, dementia, stroke risk, pregnancy, and smoking. And I actually meet a couple of those requirements on that list, and it's not pregnancy. The elderly and the medically compromised are at the greatest risk of developing serious complications from exposure. So please stay away from grandma and grandpa. Early research indicated that the pathogen may remain active on some surfaces for as much as 72 hours. This is why we as a people are currently wiping down every surface we consider a possible transmission point. Looking at that list, I doubt you would find much copper, cardboard, or stainless steel as a surface in a passenger compartment of the average car on the road today. Plastic, however, much different story. It's everywhere you look. While it's possible to contract COVID-19 from an infected surface, it is far more likely that transmission will occur person to person from inhaling respiratory vapors. This in a roundabout way is a description of what is known in virology as viral load. Viral load, you say? How big of a dose someone may receive during transmission is based on the virus particulate count in that dose. To date, there are no hard numbers for how large of a viral load causes serious COVID infection. But suffice to say that the potential viral load for someone would be greater from someone coughing in your face without a mask on than someone simply coughing into their mask. Symptoms in COVID include fever, cough, shortness of breath, loss of taste or smell. More recently, you can add nausea and gastrointestinal dysfunction to that list. However, seriously, if you experience any of the symptoms, the bottom 4 on this list, the bullet points, you need to seek medical attention immediately. To date, there is no cure or vaccine for the coronavirus, at least not that is available to the public at large. Recently, there have been therapeutic agents such as remdesivir and dexamethasone, always trip on that, for those patients needing ventilators or ECMO, as recommended by the NIH. Those are your sickest patients. For those with mild cases to moderate cases, you are urged to ride it out at home alone and hope that you can avoid the ventilator. So let's talk about personal protective equipment. And as we do, we will develop the protocols for safe contact. The absolute minimum for anyone in contact with a vehicle. So what I'm describing here is in the shop situation. With a vehicle or another person is gloves, safety glasses, goggles, or a shield, and a face mask or a respirator. Now, I prefer the N95 respirator. However, I must make it known that any CDC approved face mask will suffice in this instance. For those that already have N95 respirators, like the one that's shown in the illustration, that N95 needs to be fit tested through a fit test to be compliant with regulations, according to OSHA. But the bottom line on PPE is that without the minimum required personal protective equipment, conducting business safely is impossible. This is a direct reflection on the supply chain of PPE. If you can get the PPE, you can conduct business on a daily basis. Everybody's as good as they could be expected to be. Without the PPE, no, you are not operating in a safe environment. Prior to contact, operators, we'll get to that in a second. Operators should wash or sanitize their hands, and when we're washing for 20 seconds as the preferred method with soap and water. And if soap and water is not available, sanitize your hands using products that are alcohol-based at 60% or better. Purell, Germex, Nextcare are the commercial names. Once that's done, don your gloves, face mask, and glasses. Once your gloves have had exposure, and that means contact with something that may be contaminated, they must be disposed of and removed and disposed of before you move on to the next contact. And I said an operator. Who is an operator? An operator in this instance is anyone who has contact with a vehicle, a customer, or another staff member. Meaning that if you were at the dealership or at the repair shop and you come in the door and go to an office and isolate yourself, you are not necessarily an operator. After vehicle contact, operators will discard the gloves, wash or sanitize their hand, and don fresh gloves before the next vehicle contact or personal contact. We recommend leaving masks or respirators and eye protection in place during the shift until a break period comes up. Then clean the glasses or shields, replace disposable face masks if we're using disposables before resuming work, along with a fresh pair of gloves. If you're using a N95, that's a personal use article, wipe it down with a sanitary wipe, put it back on, go back to work. Welcome to social distancing. Everybody by now should know that to remain safe, you keep a 6 feet or more distance between you and the next person, hopefully preventing the inhalation of contaminated vapors and particles, which means we must also say goodbye in the short term to hugs and kisses. There is one exception to the social distancing rule. Techs may need to assist another tech in the process of their duties. And this will be particularly apparent to trainees, because every dealership I've ever worked at or had experience with, we're always using students to assist other techs. It's not right. It's a different discussion as to what that tech should be learning. But when you need a gopher, they're coming for your technician first. So if you're assisting another tech, only do so with full PPE on yourself and the other tech. I'm talking to the tech in that instance. Once the task is completed, discard your glove, wash or sanitize your hands, and don fresh gloves before assuming your next task or resuming the previous task that you were involved with. So in the new world, we have a challenge to keep the staff at our facility safe. It will require new and more invasive evaluation on a daily basis. And while it is a hornet's nest of legal issues regarding HIPAA, ADA, or FEHA, for those of you heading off to California, for regulations and workers' privacy, we believe the science is sound. It's up to each firm or administration individually to deploy the protocols they deem appropriate and deal with the outcome of their decisions. Companies, institutions should be establishing the new position of a health safety officer. Your HSO needs to be healthy, competent, trainable, and reliable. They need to be present every day that the operation is open or every day that you're in operation. They should be trained first in the firm's policies regarding HIPAA, ADA, or FEHA, so they know what they can and cannot disclose. They will need to be trained in the proper use of a non-contact thermometer to measure body temperature. And we, specifically CCAR, are also recommending the use that the HSO be trained to use a pulse oximeter to measure staff oxygen saturation levels. And the reason that I did this was so that as a company or for whatever institution, if you take a baseline from day one, you may have that odd person that shows up with no temperature and reports no symptoms for the past 24 hours, but is decreasing in their pulse oxygen. Something may be going on that may not be related to COVID, but you may want to give that person a heads up that says, hey, Charlie, yesterday your pulse ox was at 94. Today it's at 89. You may want to go see a doctor. Each workday, the staff should report to the HSO for screening before reporting to their stations. The HSO will check O2 saturation levels and inquire as to the staff member's health status for the past 24 hours. Staff showing or reporting no symptoms, along with a temperature and SpO2 levels within acceptable ranges, should be released to their stations. And the acceptable ranges are on the screen there at 97 to 99. And SpO2 above 94% are considered standards. Staff reporting ailments or indicating fever or a low pulse ox saturation should be prevented from taking their station and referred to a physician for further evaluation. We recommend they should not be allowed back to station without a doctor's clearance. Staff with a pulse ox below 90% should be sent to the emergency room. All HSOs also need to be assessed daily along with staff, and that could be done by their supervisor or by a second HSO if you have more than one on staff. The HSOs must report all staff with symptoms or indications of possible illness to management. Management will deal we'll deal with it from there. So as we move on to vehicle handling, we suggest that how vehicles are handled and managed goes a long way towards customer satisfaction, as well as maintaining safety. Navigating some of the landmines in the new reality will be challenging for both customers and the workforce asset. Vehicle handling will begin at intake, and wherever possible, we recommend a 100% non-contact process for staff and customers. All communications should be phone or text-based. During non-contact write-up, make sure that your customer understands all of the things that will happen before intake occurs, before the vehicle arrives, possibly. This is where we would start to employ solely electronic pay strategies whenever possible, and specific customer drop-off locations. We are going to start to isolate the outside of the facility for please drop off over here. If you have a night drop box, start using it for intakes to drop keys. Near the drop box, you might want to leave a stock of key tags and zip ties and pens with your company logo and phone number on it for your customers to fill out the key tags and take the pen away with them. You may want to consider picking up vehicles from the customer by your staff or have a towing company pick them up, and establish a specific area once those vehicles have arrived and your customers are ready to leave the vehicle for your customers to pick up rideshare, taxi, or pick up from a family member. We want to direct the staff to avoid direct contact with customers. If not, maintain social distance. And before staff retrieve any drop-offs to bring them into service, they must install seat covers and floor mats in the vehicles. Once the staff has the vehicle in service, they should immediately disinfect it by wiping down the hot spots listed above. You can find this list of hot spots here. I'm not going to go into it. It's also on NADA websites. It's also on a multitude of other websites out there of where are the hot spots to wipe in the vehicle. One thing that I will point out, though, is right below center armrest, we are recommending, unless the vehicle is in for an HVAC concern, turn the HVAC off at intake. Why circulate potentially dirty air? If you can segregate your vehicles in service by whether or not they are incoming or outgoing, do it. Park in their own separate areas. If you can segregate the keys of completed vehicles from those incoming, do that as well. The dispatch process will also change. We're recommending only one tech at a time working on the vehicle. Multiple tech contacts with the vehicle. If you have a electronics guy that's going to deal with one problem a customer has, and then most shops have a dedicated trans guy, they're going to have to figure out the sequence so that they're not working on the vehicle at the same time. When one tech finishes, the vehicle should be wiped in the areas of contact. So if that was only the steering wheel and the start button or the key, very simple. This needs to be done before the next tech takes over the vehicle. Whenever a tech pauses working on a vehicle, his gloves should be discarded. We want to prevent whatever was on that vehicle from being transferred to some other location. Tech should sanitize their hands, however that is accomplished, and don fresh gloves when changing from one vehicle to the next or before resuming work on the vehicle they just paused from. Tech should wipe down the trunk or cargo areas if they worked in those areas, and as always, used gloves must be discarded. Once service is complete, we want to wash and sanitize the vehicle before returning it to the customer. Wash the exterior of the vehicle if you're equipped. We're going to wipe down all the interior points of contact once again, as well as exterior points of contact if we did not wash the vehicle. We want to wipe down the trunk and the cargo areas if they were involved in service during that visit. Once cleanup is complete, the vehicle should be parked in a designated area if possible. The used covers and floor mats should be removed. Once that vehicle has been parked, it should be left in a state where the next person to touch it should be the customer and the customer only. If the vehicle pickup area is secure, we'd recommend leaving the keys or fobs in the vehicle for customer retrieval. Certain dealerships are already advertising, or manufacturers are already advertising that when your vehicle is sanitized, there's a seal on the door now that says "cleaned for you." We recommend that for everybody who has cleaned and secured the vehicle for their customer pickup. After parking the completed vehicles, whoever the operator was should dispose of the used covers, the used floor mat, put a clean floor mat in it, and then proceed immediately to sanitizing by discarding their gloves, washing their hands, and donning fresh gloves before the next vehicle contact. This is where the staff guidance and the guidance for students would end. What we continue on with here in the next short couple of slides is management guidance with topics that managers would need to consider if they are going to continue to operate. So if you're going to interact with customers in person, then the rules of how you do that must change. It begins with where your customers may or may not go in the facility. This message of limits must be clearly defined. You see places that I've listed on the screen, you know, let them go see the cashier and the customer parts counter and the write-up desk. They don't need to be in the shop. They've never needed to be in the shop. Some shops have always had a more lax policy that they want their customers to feel like guests, that they can go wherever they want, like mi casa, su casa. That ends today. The message of limits must be clearly defined, clearly conveyed, and that would be by signage or by a greeter, and enforced without exception. In addition, you'll be instituting things like a regular disinfection schedule for your public areas, and you'll want that to be seen. You'll want somebody in a yellow vest that's going to ask customers to please excuse them as they come in and spritz and wipe down. You will probably have revised occupancy limits for the facility, and that's going to, in turn, ask customers to possibly queue up outside until space opens up inside, if we're limiting the number of persons coming into the building. You'll also be placing markers on the floor of the pavement showing social distance intervals and the path of ingress or entrance into the facility for your visitors. Excuse me. You'll also see plastic barriers between the staff and the visitors to limit respiratory exchanges. It's important that visitors understand that they may be required to wear a mask to enter the facility. They may be temperature screened before entering your facility, and they may be denied for a fever or presenting symptoms like a cough. This is all part of a new company policy that you will derive.
Bob, I have
Which
a
leaves
quick
us,
question.
yeah, I'm sorry?
Sorry, quick question, if I may.
If you want to give me, I've only got like 3 sides left, and then we can write the questions.
Understood.
All right, let's zip through this real quick, and then we're out. This leaves us with the federal regulations, and here we will see some of the things employers should be doing already. We'll also look at where things have changed, and a key among these provisions of the regulations is providing a workplace free of recognized hazards. And to do that, to accomplish that, we need to conduct or would have conducted from the beginning of our business history, a hazard assessment to identify those hazards. Based on that assessment, the employer would generally select the proper PPE, train his workers, and inform them that there is a hazard that they need to be protected from with that PPE. Employers will also need to communicate hazardous materials and hazardous situations that workers may be exposed to. They must also train workers on hazards and hazardous substances as they develop. So in the current upside down climate pandemic, things in the work have changed significantly. One among them is that it will probably require a revised hazard assessment of the facility. And it's likely that the new hazard assessment will point out that things like employees that previously didn't need personal protective equipment, specifically car hikers, porters, runners, now need it, as well as technicians that will need masks and gloves full time. New cleaning substances may also be used. That's a new hazard communication requirement. Employers will need to inform everybody that there are new products being used in the building, and if necessary, will need to retrain their workers. Which brings us to the additional list resource. Here are some places. I'll refer you to the handout. Any place that you go is going to generally bring you back to the Centers for Disease Control. And with that, we're at a point for questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. Yes, John Fagan asks, the procedure here at the dealership, you know, preparing the car for return to the customer sounds expensive. Is that expense passed along to the customer somehow in the bill, or is the dealership responsible for covering all of those additional steps?
Let me let you in on a little secret, and all the dealers' hair is going to catch fire and explode right now. But typically, service departments have always had something on the bill, unless you dispute it and tell them to get rid of it, which is called a miscellaneous shop charge. And that's for things like nuts, bolts, tape, wire, things that are not charged to an invoice. You know, if you go in and get a starter, that starter is usually listed at, you know, $200,000, $500,000, whatever it costs for a starter these days, depending upon the model. But a percentage of the bill, maybe anywhere from 0.5% to 2%, is also charged to you based on the total for parts and labor, depending upon your state. Up here, it's not charged against labor, it's charged only against parts. But it's for miscellaneous. If you need grease, if you need brake clean, if you need carburetor cleaner, if you need gloves, rags, anything that is a shop supply item is coming out of that. And along with that, that has also expanded into things like we operate the car wash. Because most of the dealers, at least up here, to compete with the dealer next door, if I'm Ford dealer A and you're Ford dealer B, we're pretty much on a level playing field other than the size. If I'm a really big guy and you're really small, you're at a disadvantage. But if we're at approximately the same number of staff, same number of cars on the lot, if I give a oil change and a multi-point inspection for, I don't know, $39.95, we'll pick a number out, plus the shop charge, I'm washing all of my cars. And I'm doing that as an inside fixed expense. Dealers have been doing this, at least in this neighborhood, for decades. They've had to do it because mostly other manufacturers, your high-end manufacturers from Europe and Japan, have been providing this longer than domestic manufacturers have been providing it. The domestic manufacturers are a little late catching up, but they are now trying to outdo each other in their own franchise group for why would you go to Ford dealer A, come over to Ford dealer B, we'll give you this, 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 and this. So it's not adding anything to the bottom line that you haven't been experienced to already. Hope that answers it.
Thanks, Bob. And also James Carter adds that some of the dealers may be using some of the money they receive from the government to offset that cost.
True. Where you will see, my comment to that is, where you will see the change in cost structure, dealers are now looking at providing service on site, mobile service. If you're bringing your car to the dealership, $39.95 for the oil change, the rotate, and the multi-point. If you're going to have that done at your house, I doubt that it's going to come out at the same amount of money. It's a premium service, so that might be $75.95. It could be any number. You're not going to get a car wash, and the technician runs the risk of dropping oil in your driveway. Hopefully they have sufficient means to control what drops off the bottom of the vehicle. Otherwise, you have stains in the pavement. But these are one of the things that a lot of manufacturers are looking at very, very seriously and very closely as of today, in the current climate, to help offset some of the reduced dollars that are coming into service departments.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. That's all we have right now as far as questions. What I've posed to the panel here of attendees is, we'd really like to know how your district or institution plans to handle the startup this fall in light of the situation with COVID-19. I haven't really heard back from anyone yet, but certainly, Charlie, if you have any additional thoughts on this, we have about what looks like 12 minutes left before closing out the session.
No, I think Bob hit the high points. Thank you for going through that. It's a moving target. We're learning as things go down the road. We are still in the midst of developing more materials, so we will be sure to share that with you, Mark, as well as with the attendees here as those become available, because we're learning as we go down this road.
Awesome. Also, James Carter would like to know, what kind of startup plans would this entail for what I assume would be a high school level program? So what, you know, what are the plans, I guess, what are the expenses on average for making sure that folks are prepared at their school?
Well, if we do a little quick segregation in our mind, in the mind's eye, using the previous presentation, we would remove things like customer write-up, cashiering, and it would leave itself to vehicles coming in and out, and vehicle disinfection, and maintaining social distance, and staff health safety monitoring. Now, I'll address that first. I don't know how any particular district is going to address screening. I would push that right back to your administration. How do we deal with it? I have a guidance and a pathway. I would probably bet you that 99% of them would disagree with it out of hand directly until they had a chance to confer with legal authorities. And I would support that decision at any point. As far as personal protective equipment, you already have technicians that are required to come into the shop with safety glasses. So that's taken off of the table. If they're not, the only difference being here is that instead of only being required to wear their safety glasses in the lab or in the shop, they will be required to wear it in class anytime they're present. This brings up the expense of gloves and the expense of masks. Reach out. I am finding, and nobody wants to admit to it, so there's nobody that's on the record, but educators and school districts have an easier path to get it, as do first responders and hospitals, than those of us in the general public. You probably have access to a better grade of it than those of us in the general public. But most importantly, you should be able to get it at closer to a, I'm not going to say the customary amount, because what we used to pay for a box of gloves and what you pay for it now, I wish I had a stock of 10,000 boxes of gloves. I could retire and not give these presentations anymore. And that's a travesty. But if you do a little research, you will probably get yourself off and running. Your maintenance departments will be able to reach out on your behalf to find cleaning agents that are suitable. CDC and EPA websites will give you specifics on name brands that meet the requirements. The only thing that you'll have to be careful of is sensitivity of individuals. So you're going to be using more products. You're going to need, you probably already have to maintain safety data sheets on premises, just like a employer would, for at least the instructors to be notified. I would notify any of the students coming in that if you notice that you have a sudden irritation, let's deal with that right away. Don't keep your mouth shut. The remainder of it is can be carried over from, if I have a set of tools, if I have a particular lab station, whatever I am doing, if I'm working on it, I should be working on it without a partner. If I'm being proctored for some reason, perhaps if it's like a teacher needs to be looking at the screen of a laptop or a scan tool, we may be bringing in larger monitors. If we have large monitors, we may want to set them aside to put them at a distance where the instructor could keep a reasonable distance to watch what the student is doing over his shoulder instead of having to be right up on top of them. These are all things that we're working on in preparation for release of more information for education. Primarily, awesome. This has been addressed with commercial entities first.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. Just a couple of quick comments here in the time that we have left. Mr. John Mummert there at the Tennessee DOE over transportation says many districts are still in the process of deciding actually how to open. James Clevin says we are no longer sharing PPE, specifically safety glasses. Everybody's got their own glasses and obviously masks. Douglas Lyles indicates that Sumner County is starting a hybrid model as of today. And folks, the key word today, for those of you that have already asked, is training. The key word is training. Use that word to gain your credit for attending our session. And we really appreciate your attendance today. Also, Ronald Burks asks for a session ID. John Mummert, I don't know if you have that offhand, but I can dig for that session ID as well here momentarily. Those are the questions I have so far. So folks, in the time that we have left, if you don't mind, Bob, I'll share my screen for just a moment.
Take it away.
All right. And let's go here and here, and then bring this up full screen. Hopefully you can see that. Actually, let's bring that back down to just what I need here. So here's where it's running, folks, inside of Electude. Bob, can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. Okay, so if we were to back out just momentarily and show you where we were, we're over on the Courses tab in Electude website. There's your CCAR grouping of course standards. As I mentioned earlier, 60 lessons inside, plus the post-test that leads to a certificate. That's 136 hours of materials. A couple clicks away, and you've drilled into what is a range of content on safety from CCAR, including down here towards the very bottom, COVID-19. So what we've got is both best practices and safety for the automotive operational staff, as well as for operations management. So if you click on either of these, you can go in and start that module. This is what it would look like from your desktop. You've got a range of sections here with questions that the students can move through. This is gamified learning, folks. So this is not going to be something where students can click, click, click all the way through and do, as we call, Christmas tree the entire thing. They have got to do well on this before they can move forward. So each section represents a range of new content, from core competencies to pathogen descriptions to symptoms and treatment, PPE. In fact, a couple of bullets there on PPE. Again, each with their own questions that the student must answer in order to move forward. They cannot move forward in this content unless they get it right. As an instructor, as I'm logged in presently, I have the power to go in now and move to where I need to be to teach this particular content on SAF safety, I should say, and health monitoring, for example. Electude has just placed a brand new button here at the top as well. If I click on that full screen button, that takes us to full screen, and now we can run through it like a PowerPoint or like a presentation where the notes have gone away, but I can still share the images remotely or in person. A quick click of the escape button on your keyboard brings you back to a normal screen view, where you're back to both the theory content at the top as well as the assessment towards the bottom right. Everything here, folks, has a voiceover as well. So you have a complete voiceover, in fact, in 36 languages now from Electude. I believe the translation for CCAR is somewhere, Bob, between English and Spanish at least, but I think there's plans to continue rolling out additional languages if I'm not correct.
I believe you are correct that to date, because it was only released for North America, or actually only for the US, that it's in English and Spanish.
Yeah, so far, and then they're going to be continuing to translate that into French and other languages as well. Here in Gwinnett County, I know we serve over 200, closing in on 300 languages here in Gwinnett County. So we can help. So that's a look at that. If we back out of the lesson and then back out one more level, we can go into operations management as well and start that module. And again, we're off and running into this new content from a management perspective. Okay, so that's a little bit about our session today. I'll go quickly back to the GTR page and have a quick look at the balance of our questions here. And John Mummert indicates that the session ID is LXN6C. There's your session ID. Again, keyword is training. And we thank you so much for attending today. Bob and Charlie, thank you so much for everything you're doing with CCAR. We really appreciate your help today.
Thank you, Mark.
Very
Appreciate
welcome.
the opportunity.
All right. And on that note, we're coming up on 11:15, and we'll go ahead and close out the meeting right at 11:15. Thank you, John. We appreciate you, John Mummert. Thank you very much. Great week. Thanks, Bob. We'll see you, buddy.
Take care. Good
See you
talking.
soon. Take care. Take care, everyone.